Dominic Voss controlled a multi-billion-dollar empire using only sound and scent. There was one thing in that empire he could never fully possess, and it drove him to a kind of obsession he hadn't experienced in 14 years of total darkness. Dominic had been blind since the age of 23, the result of a rare degenerative condition that had taken his sight gradually over 18 months, giving him just enough warning to prepare, with the same relentless engineering precision that had already made him a rising force in the tech industry, for a life he refused to let unfold as diminished. By 37, he ran Voss Dynamics from a headquarters he'd designed himself. A building outfitted with spatial audio arrays that let him track footsteps to within inches, synthetic scent profiles assigned to every senior executive so he could identify who'd entered a room before they spoke a word, and a boardroom acoustically engineered so precisely that he could hear a single sheet of paper shift on a table across the room. He ran his company, and by extension his life, the way he'd learned to run everything since losing his sight, through absolute engineered control over every variable his environment could possibly present. Nothing entered his sensory field without his knowledge. Nobody moved through his building without his tracking systems registering their exact position. It was, by any reasonable measure, a remarkable system, and it had worked flawlessly without exception for 6 years. It failed for the first time on a Tuesday morning in March, the day Clara Bennett started as Voss Dynamics' new director of product design. Dominic knew she'd entered the building. His system logged her badge swipe at the main entrance at 8:47 a.m. What he could not explain, what left him standing motionless in his own office for nearly 30 seconds, running through every possible malfunction his engineers could investigate, was that from that point forward, his spatial audio system registered nothing. No footsteps. No door. No chair. It was as though the building's newest employee had simply stopped existing the moment she crossed his threshold, and Dominic Voss, a man who had spent 6 years methodically eliminating every uncertainty his blindness could produce, found himself facing the first person in 14 years he genuinely could not locate. If a hook like that already has you curious, go ahead and hit that like button right now. It genuinely helps the story reach more people, and I read every single comment, so tell me, what do you think makes someone move through the world without leaving a single trace? Let's find out exactly who Clara Bennett was, and why Dominic couldn't stop thinking about a woman his own considerable technology couldn't track. Dominic requested Clara's employee file within the hour, a request his assistant, Priya Anand, fulfilled with the same efficient discretion she brought to every aspect of managing his considerable professional life. She's remarkable, by every account, Priya said, reading through the file aloud at his request. Since Dominic's own screen readers handled text but not the visual portfolio pieces the hiring committee had included. Top of her program at Rhode Island School of Design. 5 years at a boutique product studio before we recruited her. Her design philosophy statement is genuinely striking. She writes about creating objects that respect a user's need for privacy and control over their own sensory experience. That's an unusual philosophy for a product designer, Dominic said. There's a note here from HR, Priya continued, a careful hesitation entering her voice. A workplace accommodation request. She's asked that physical contact, handshakes, the standard onboarding welcome gestures, anything involving touch, be avoided entirely. The request doesn't specify a medical or personal reason, and HR's granted it without further inquiry, as our policy generally requires. Dominic sat with this for a long moment. In 14 years of blindness, touch had become, in many ways, more essential to his understanding of the world than it had ever been when he could see. A handshake told him something about a person's confidence. A hand on his shoulder communicated warmth his other senses couldn't fully replicate. The idea of a colleague who'd formally, deliberately removed that entire channel of communication from their working relationship struck him as something considerably more significant than a simple personal preference. Has anyone violated the accommodation? He asked. Not that's been reported, Priya said. By all accounts, she maintains it consistently and without apparent discomfort explaining it when necessary. People seem to respect it easily enough, once she stated it plainly. Clara Bennett had built her entire adult life around a single, hard-won principle. That her body, and the specific sensation of another person's hands upon it, belonged to her alone, to offer or withhold entirely on her own terms. She was 29, and the boundary she maintained with total consistency had its origins in a relationship she'd survived at 24. Not one that had involved violence in any way the law would have recognized, but one that had involved a partner who treated her physical space as something he was entitled to access whenever he wished, regardless of what she'd actually communicated in the moment. It had taken her the better part of 2 years afterward to fully understand what that relationship had cost her, and longer still to rebuild a relationship with her own body that felt genuinely, entirely her own again. The boundary she'd settled on, no physical contact, period, without exception, communicated plainly and without extensive explanation to anyone who needed to understand it, had become, over the 4 years since, less a wound she carried than a genuine source of strength. It was a boundary she'd chosen deliberately, maintained consistently, and found, increasingly, that most people respected without difficulty once she'd stated it clearly. Those who couldn't respect it, she'd learned, revealed something important about their character quickly enough that the boundary itself functioned as a useful filter. She had heard about Dominic Voss's reputation before accepting the position at Voss Dynamics, the blind CEO whose considerable technological mastery over his own sensory environment had become something of a legend within the tech industry, a man described in equal measure as brilliant and formidably intense. She hadn't anticipated, walking into the building on her first morning, that her own careful, practiced way of moving through space, quiet, deliberate, learned originally as a form of self-protection and refined over years into something closer to genuine grace, would register to a man whose entire professional identity depended on tracking everyone around him, as something considerably more disruptive than she could have reasonably predicted. That contrast between Dominic's obsessive control and Clara's quiet, deliberate boundaries is exactly the tension this story is going to explore, so if you're already curious how these two people navigate something this complicated, drop a comment with the word silence. I think it's going to matter a lot more than either of them expects. And if this story's earning your attention so far, go ahead and subscribe now. The next part is where they actually meet directly. Dominic arranged, through Priya, a formal introduction meeting for that same afternoon, a decision he told himself was simply appropriate protocol for welcoming a new senior hire, though some private, less examined part of him understood it carried a considerably more personal curiosity beneath that professional framing. Clara arrived at his office at the scheduled time, and Dominic, despite every one of his sophisticated tracking systems being fully operational, found himself once again unable to register her approach until Priya's voice, from the doorway, announced her arrival directly. "Mr. Voss," Clara said, her own voice carrying a calm, measured quality that gave nothing away of whatever curiosity she might have carried about the meeting. "Thank you for making time on my first day." "Ms. Bennett," Dominic said, rising from his desk with the careful, practiced orientation he developed for greeting new colleagues. "I understand our HR team has already processed your accommodation request, and I want you to know it will be fully respected in every interaction we have, including this one. I won't be extending a handshake." "I appreciate that," Clara said, something in her tone suggesting genuine, if measured, surprise that he'd addressed it so directly and without requiring her to raise it herself. "I'll be direct with you about something else as well," Dominic said, settling back into his chair. "I track nearly everyone who enters this building through a spatial audio system I've spent years refining. Footsteps, breathing patterns, the specific rhythm of how someone moves through a space. It's become, in the years since I lost my sight, one of my primary ways of understanding the people around me. This morning, for the first time in 6 years of using that system, I registered nothing when you entered this building. I'd like to understand how that's possible, if you're willing to explain it." Clara was quiet for a long moment. "I spent several years learning to move without announcing my presence," she said finally, carefully. "It wasn't originally about your particular technology, Mr. Voss. It was about something else entirely. I don't know that I'm prepared to explain the full history behind it, particularly not on my first day." "That's entirely fair," Dominic said, and meant it, though the specific, professional curiosity he'd felt all morning had, by that point, deepened into something he recognized, with genuine discomfort, as considerably more personal. Over the following weeks, Dominic found himself, against every careful professional instinct he'd built across 6 years of leading Voss Dynamics, increasingly preoccupied with a colleague whose quiet, deliberate presence continued to elude every sophisticated system he'd designed specifically to eliminate exactly this kind of sensory uncertainty from his life. He began, without fully acknowledging the pattern even to himself, finding professional reasons to interact with Clara considerably more often than her role on the product design team strictly required. Reviewing early concept work together, seeking her input on projects outside her direct area, extending meetings past their scheduled length. When their conversations moved into genuinely engaging territory, neither of them seemed eager to end. Clara, for her part, found herself genuinely surprised by the specific quality of Dominic's attentiveness. Not the intrusive, boundary-testing curiosity she'd learned to recognize and deflect quickly in other people once they discovered her accommodation, but something considerably more respectful, a man who asked thoughtful questions and then, without fail, accepted whatever boundaries her answers implied without pushing further. "You've never once asked me directly why I maintain the no-contact policy," she observed, for weeks into their growing acquaintance. The two of them working late on a product prototype in Dominic's office. "I've wanted to," Dominic admitted, "considerably more than I should probably admit, given how thoroughly I've spent 14 years learning to catalog everything about the people around me through every sense still available to me. I've made a specific choice not to ask, though, because I understand, better than most people probably do, exactly how invasive it feels when someone treats your body or your boundaries as a mystery they're entitled to solve." Clara considered this for a long moment. "That's a considerably more thoughtful answer than I expected," she said. "I'd like to think most things about me are more thoughtful than my reputation probably suggests," Dominic said, something dry and genuinely warm entering his voice for the first time in their acquaintance. "Though I understand the tech press has built a considerably more intense version of me than the one actually sitting in this office most evenings. That mutual respect is exactly the foundation this whole relationship's going to be built on. And if it's already got you rooting for them, go ahead and hit that like button. It's the single biggest thing that tells YouTube to put this story in front of more people. And comment below. Do you think Dominic's genuinely capable of respecting Clara's boundary long-term? Or is his curiosity eventually going to become a problem? I want to hear your honest take. Let's keep going. Marcus Chun had served as VOS Dynamics Chief Operating Officer for nearly 5 years, and had watched, with growing and genuinely uncomfortable concern, the specific pattern developing between Dominic and Clara over the preceding months. A pattern that carried, in Marcus's careful private assessment, real professional risk given Dominic's position as CEO and Clara's own considerable standing within the company's design leadership. Marcus raised his concerns directly during a routine leadership meeting in late spring, choosing his words with the specific diplomacy the situation demanded. "I need to raise something outside our usual agenda," he said, once the meeting's formal business had concluded and only he and Dominic remained. "The board's noticed your considerable attention toward Ms. Bennett, Dominic. I raise this not out of any personal judgment, but because a CEO-subordinate relationship, however genuine, creates real governance concerns this board will eventually need to address directly, particularly given some of our current investor negotiations." Dominic sat with this for a long moment. "I appreciate you raising it directly, Marcus," he said. "I'll tell you honestly, I don't yet know what this actually is between Clara and myself. I've made a specific point of never once crossing the boundary she's established, and I don't intend to. But I won't pretend the professional concern you're raising isn't legitimate, or that I haven't thought about it myself." "What do you intend to do about it?" Marcus asked. "I intend to be honest with Clara about the professional complications this creates," Dominic said. "And I intend to let her decide, with full information, whether continuing whatever this has become is something she genuinely wants, rather than making that decision unilaterally on her behalf because it happens to be more convenient for the company's governance concerns." Dominic raised the conversation with Clara that same evening, understanding the specific professional risk of the discussion but believing, with genuine conviction, that total honesty represented the only defensible approach given everything he'd already come to respect about her. "Marcus raised a legitimate concern today," he told her, "about the professional complications of whatever's developing between us, given my position and yours within the company. I want to be direct with you about it, rather than letting it remain an unaddressed complication neither of us has acknowledged." "I've thought about it too," Clara admitted. "I don't know that I have a clean answer for how we'd actually navigate that complication, if this becomes something more than professional colleagues who respect each other considerably." "I don't have a clean answer either," Dominic said. I'd like to be honest about something else as well, since we're already having this difficult conversation. I've come to care about you, Clara, considerably more than any professional relationship should reasonably produce. I understand your boundary around physical touch, and I want to be completely clear, that boundary isn't something I'm hoping to eventually change or work around. Whatever this becomes between us, if it becomes anything at all, I need you to know it can exist entirely on your terms, with that boundary fully intact for as long as you need it to be. Clara studied him for a long, considering moment. Most people, she said quietly, eventually treat that boundary as an obstacle to be patiently overcome, even when they claim to respect it initially. I need you to understand how significant it is, hearing you say that and actually meaning it. I do mean it, Dominic said. I've spent 14 years learning that genuine respect for another person's autonomy over their own body and their own choices matters considerably more than whatever curiosity or desire I might feel about crossing into territory they haven't invited me into. I'm not interested in becoming another person who treats your boundary as a puzzle to solve rather than a decision to respect. Now you know exactly where Dominic actually stands, and if that answer changed how you're thinking about him, comment respect below. If you're still watching carefully to see whether he actually holds to that promise, comment watching instead. I want to see which side of this story has you more invested. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, because their relationship is about to be tested in a way neither of them anticipated. Their relationship developed, over the following months, into something neither of them had fully expected when Clara first walked into Dominic's building without registering on a single one of his sophisticated tracking systems. A genuine partnership built on considerable emotional intimacy, deep professional respect, and long, honest conversations that stretched late into countless evenings, with Clara's physical boundary remaining exactly as consistently honored as Dominic had promised. Clara found herself, across those months, sharing considerably more of her own history than she'd originally anticipated. Not the full, specific details of the relationship that had first taught her the necessity of her current boundary, but enough genuine context that Dominic understood, with growing clarity, exactly what courage her consistency actually represented. I used to think, she told him one evening, the two of them sharing a meal in his apartment after a long day, sitting at a comfortable distance that had become their natural, unforced rhythm, that maintaining this boundary meant I'd never be able to have anything resembling genuine intimacy with another person. I think I've learned, spending time with you these past months, that intimacy was never actually about physical touch in the first place. It's about exactly this, being genuinely known and genuinely respected, regardless of what boundaries someone needs to maintain to feel safe. I'd like to think I've learned something considerably similar, Dominic said. I spent 6 years building systems specifically to eliminate every uncertainty my blindness could produce, believing total control over my sensory environment was the only genuine security available to me. I've come to understand, through knowing you, that some of the most significant connections a person can build exist precisely in the space where control isn't actually possible, where you simply have to trust someone else's character, rather than any system designed to eliminate the need for that trust entirely. It was Priya who first raised, gently and with genuine care for both of them, the question neither Dominic nor Clara had yet directly addressed. You've built something genuinely significant together, she observed, during a quiet moment in Dominic's office roughly 8 months into their relationship. I don't believe either of you has fully acknowledged, though, what it might mean for Clara's own comfort and safety if this relationship continues developing without ever addressing whether her boundary is something she wants to maintain permanently, or something she might eventually want to reconsider on her own terms, with someone she genuinely trusts. Dominic considered this carefully before raising it with Clara directly that same evening. Priya asked me something today I don't believe either of us has fully addressed, he said. I want to be completely clear before I ask this, that I'm not asking because I want your boundary to change. I'm asking because I care about you, and I want to understand what you actually want for yourself going forward, without any assumption on my part about what that should look like. What are you asking, exactly? Clara said. Whether the boundary you've maintained these past 4 years is something you want to remain permanent, regardless of trust or circumstance, Dominic said carefully. Or whether it was always specifically a response to a situation where your trust had been violated, and something you might, someday, on your own timeline and entirely your own decision, Want to reconsider with someone you've come to trust completely. I don't need an answer tonight, Clara. I don't need an answer ever, if the answer is that this boundary is simply and permanently part of who you are. I only want you to know that whatever you decide, for whatever reason, is entirely yours to decide, without any pressure from me either direction. That's exactly the kind of respectful, patient question this whole story's been building toward, and if it landed for you, go ahead and like this video right now. It's the single biggest thing that tells YouTube to put this story in front of more people. And comment below. Do you think Clara's ready to reconsider her boundary? Or is Dominic's patience the actual point of this story, regardless of what she eventually decides? I want to hear your honest take. Let's find out what she says. Clara sat with Dominic's question for several days before responding, understanding, with the same careful deliberation she brought to every significant decision in her life, exactly how much genuine consideration the question actually deserved. She found him in his office on a quiet Thursday evening, the building largely empty around them, and settled into the chair across from his desk with a specific, deliberate calm. "I've thought considerably about what you asked," she said. "I want to be honest about something first. The boundary I've maintained these past 4 years was never actually about believing I was permanently incapable of trusting anyone with physical intimacy again. It was about making sure, absolutely and without exception, that I would never again find myself in a situation where someone else's hands were on my body without my full, genuine, considered consent. I needed, for a long time, total and complete boundary as the only way I could trust myself to actually maintain that principle consistently." "And now?" Dominic asked, his voice carrying careful, genuine attention rather than any anticipation of a particular answer. "Now I've spent 8 months with a man who has never once, not even slightly, made me question whether my boundary was genuinely respected," Clara said. "I've come to trust you, Dominic, more completely than I believed I'd trust anyone again. I don't know that I'm ready to fully abandon the boundary I've built. I think, honestly, some version of careful, deliberate consent will always matter more to me than it might to someone who never had reason to build this particular protection. But I'd like, if you're willing, to explore what a considerably more open version of that boundary might look like, entirely on my own timeline, with someone I've come to trust as completely as I trust you." What followed was not a single, dramatic moment of transformation, but a genuinely gradual process, Clara initiating, on her own terms and at her own careful pace, small and specific expansions of the boundary she'd maintained for 4 years, each one entirely her own choice, offered rather than requested, and received by Dominic with the same careful, grateful respect he'd shown every other aspect of her boundary from the very beginning. "You understand," Clara told him, some weeks into that gradual process, "that this isn't me abandoning something I built for good reason. This is me choosing, deliberately and with full consideration, to extend genuine trust to someone who's actually earned it." "I understand that completely," Dominic said. "I'd like to think I've spent 14 years learning that the most meaningful things in life are rarely the ones you can fully control or predict in advance. I didn't build my sensory systems hoping to eventually find someone they couldn't track. I built them because uncertainty terrified me. I've come to understand, through knowing you, that some uncertainty, the kind built on genuine trust between two people who've chosen each other deliberately, isn't actually a threat at all. It's simply what real intimacy requires." Marcus Chen's earlier governance concerns, once he understood the genuine depth and consistency of Dominic and Clara's relationship over the following year, gradually resolved into genuine support, a recognition, shared increasingly across Voss Dynamics leadership, that whatever complications the relationship initially raised had been navigated with a level of care and mutual respect that made the eventual formal disclosure to the board, and Clara's subsequent transition into a newly created Chief Design Officer role reporting directly to the board rather than to Dominic personally, considerably less contentious than Marcus had originally anticipated. Dominic and Clara married 18 months after that first, unregistered morning when Clara Bennett walked into Voss Dynamics without triggering a single one of his sophisticated tracking systems. A ceremony considerably quieter than either of their professional profiles might have suggested, attended by the small circle of people who genuinely witnessed the careful, patient trust they'd built together. "You know," Clara said, standing beside him at their small reception, her hand resting in his with the same easy, chosen comfort that had become, over their years together, entirely natural rather than remarkable. I used to believe my boundary meant I'd never experience the specific version of intimacy other people seem to take for granted. And now, Dominic asked, now I understand that what we've actually built is considerably more genuine than anything I might have experienced without ever having to build that boundary in the first place. Clara said, I don't think most people ever learn, the way I was forced to learn, exactly how much trust actually matters, or exactly how rare it is to find someone genuinely capable of earning it patiently, without ever once treating your boundaries as an obstacle rather than a person's genuine right to determine. Some men build empires around eliminating every uncertainty their circumstances might otherwise force upon them, mistaking total control for genuine security. Dominic Voss spent 6 years building exactly that kind of empire, until a woman his own considerable technology couldn't track taught him something his engineering never could, that the deepest, most genuine connection a person can build isn't the one where every variable is controlled and predicted. It's the one built patiently on a foundation of consistent respect, where someone else's autonomy matters more than your own curiosity, and where trust, genuinely earned rather than assumed, becomes the truest security either person could ever actually build. If you made it all the way to the end of this one, thank you genuinely. This channel, Storyrealm Hub, exists entirely because of stories like this one, and every single like, subscribe, and comment makes a real difference in how many people get to find them. If the story earned it, do those 3 things right now, and tell me in the comments which moment hit hardest for you. I read every single one. See you in the next story.